Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. So, in an ideal world, the study of historic figures should be approached impartially. We should be recognising and checking how our bias, politics, even experiences might affect our reading of a person or situation from the past. And of course, the rational, logical part of my brain reminds me nearly constantly that it is somewhat odd, and it's potentially even a waste of my energy, that I actively dislike a person who I have never met, someone who died centuries ago. And I do get that, and I also agree. But there are just some people who make remembering that and sticking to it harder than others. For me, our subject for today is one of those people. Now, as always, I will be aiming to provide you with as balanced an account as possible. But part of being able to provide that balance is acknowledging right at the top of this video that at my core, I just don't like this bloke. So that's my disclaimer. Make of it what you will. And now it's time for us all to go in search of Thomas Seymour. Thomas was born in around 1509 to Sir John Seymour and his wife Marjorie. Thomas's father John had received his knighthood from King Henry VII on the field of the Battle of Blackheath in 1497. John was a relatively prosperous land-owning gentleman, albeit a rather obscure one. His children, Thomas included, would, however, catapult the family to fame and, in some cases, to infamy. John and Marjorie would have 10 children, 6 sons and 4 daughters. Thomas was the couple's 4th son. The Seymour family seat was at Wolf Hall in Wiltshire, and in the 21st century, of course, Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy is the thing that highlights the significance of that property for some of her readers. 4 of John and Marjorie's 10 children would end up serving as courtiers. So there was Thomas, his elder brother Edward, and their sisters Jane and Elizabeth. Edward was his parents' eldest surviving child, and this may go some way to explain the seeming preferential treatment that he received from his family. Edward was 9 years older than Thomas, so he's born therefore in around 1500. And by the time he was in his mid-teens, Edward had already been placed at court. In 1514, Thomas's big brother had been made a page of honour to Mary Tudor, this is Henry VIII's sister, and in that role he accompanied her to France for her short-lived marriage to Louis XII. Edward was also a soldier, and he was part of the invasion of France led by Charles Brandon, and by this point Brandon is Henry VIII's brother-in-law, and that invasion took place in 1523. Edward was then knighted on the 1st of November 1523. Appointments and promotions soon begin to stack up for Edward. They bring him personal power, but they also draw him closer to his king. He was made Esquire of the King's household in 1524, a Justice of the Peace for Wiltshire in January 1525, Master of the Horse to Henry Fitzroy, also in 1525, and then, on the 12th of September 1531, Edward became an Esquire of the Body to King Henry VIII. At around this time, Edward's little brother was trying to forge his own way at court too. Now, if future events can be any indication of past relationships and even feelings, then I believe that at this moment, Thomas would have been looking over, eyeing the plate of his elder brother's courtly, military, political success with a mixture of aspiration and bitterish jealousy. I've decided to refer to Edward's achievements in this video on Thomas because I think that what was once maybe a sense of possibly healthy sibling competition, for some reason and at some point, gave way to a feeling of deep injustice. I think this feeling soured any chance of there being a supportive relationship between the brothers. I also believe that this sense of injustice contributed to, although absolutely does not excuse, some of Thomas's more questionable behaviour in the future. While we have previously in this video discussed the details of Edward's ascent, Thomas's early court career is more obscure. According to G.W. Bernard, quote, "By 1530, Thomas Seymour was in the service of the leading courtier Sir Francis Bryan." Now, Sir Francis Bryan will no doubt get his own video on this channel at some point, but to briefly introduce the man and to indicate the kind of company that young Thomas was keeping, Francis Bryan was known affectionately, by some at least, as the Vicar of Hell. A jousting accident in 1526 had cost him an eye, so he wore a patch in what I imagine must have been a jaunty way. He was a distant cousin of both the Boleyns and the Seymours. He was a notorious womanizer. There was also, seemingly, nothing that he wouldn't do in the service of his king. At least at first, Sir Francis Bryan was a firm supporter of his cousin Anne Boleyn as she mounted up to the throne. In late 1528, he was sent to Rome to persuade the Pope of the need to allow Henry to enter into a new marriage. During this embassy, he was keeping Anne informed with letters of her own from him. But in April 1529, he informed Henry that the Pope would do nothing for him and that anyone who had told him otherwise had lied to him. Now, Anne had mistrusted Cardinal Wolsey and had long doubted his desire to see her become queen. So, in this message to Henry, Francis Bryan is heavily implying that Wolsey had deceived his king. A thought that Bryan must have known would displease Henry. Soon enough, moving in concert with his king, Bryan's support would swing away from Anne and the Boleyn faction and towards his other cousins, the Seymours. How useful for him to have such an extensive family, all of whom were so well placed. During the royal progress of 1535, Henry and Anne had stayed with the Seymours at Wolf Hall, and they'd done this in the September. They'd also stayed with them at Elvetham in the October. It's often claimed that it was during one of these Seymour stays that the king first became besotted with one of his wife's ladies, Jane Seymour. Thomas would certainly rise as a result of his sister's relationship with the king, but that would not be until later. His brother Edward would rise first. Edward was made a gentleman of the Privy Chamber on the 3rd of March 1536. Then, a few days later, Edward, his second wife Anne and his sister Jane were given rooms at Greenwich Palace, which the king could reach through a private passage. Within a couple of months, Jane's mistress and queen had been arrested, tried and executed. The day after Anne had been beheaded, Jane was betrothed to the king, and the couple would marry in the Queen's closet at the Palace of Whitehall on the 30th of May, 1536. Thomas was now brother-in-law to the King of England, and if Jane did her part, gave birth to a healthy, bouncy baby boy, then he would also be the uncle of the next king. However, he was still a younger brother. So it wouldn't be Thomas, but Edward, that on the 5th of June, so just a week after the wedding, who would be the one to advance further. Edward became Viscount Beauchamp. And then the next month, on the 7th of July, Edward was made Governor and Captain of Jersey, and the month after that, in the August, Edward became Chancellor of North Wales. Thomas would have to wait until the 2nd of October 1536 to be named as a gentleman of the Privy Chamber. In the early months of 1537, Jane would have got her first inklings that she was pregnant. Then, on the 27th of May 1537, it was time for a Te Deum to be sung in St Paul's Cathedral as an act of thanksgiving that Jane had felt her baby move. This was referred to as quickening in the parlance of the day. Jane's baby's quickening was proof that it was alive and growing well within her. 5 days earlier, Jane's eldest surviving brother, Edward, had had his own reason to give thanks, because he had joined Henry's council on the 22nd of May, 1537. Thomas, on the other hand, although not overlooked, had been named as joint master steward of a collection of sites that was spread between Denbighshire and the Welsh marches. And this certainly represents preferment and provincial influence, but obviously it can't possibly come close to a seat on the council, something that represents a place at the very heart of Tudor government and decision-making. It warrants stating, I think, that Henry's apparent preference for promoting Edward, with titles, political power and proximity to his own royal person, would not have been solely down to him being his new wife's eldest brother. Now, clearly, Jane's place would have had an effect, but Edward must have displayed personal qualities that earned him the trust and favour of his king. And with that in mind, I don't know if that fact would have made Thomas feel better or worse about his own place, respectively. In the early hours of the 12th of October 1537, Jane Seymour was delivered of Henry's most desperately desired son and heir. Sure enough, Thomas and Edward were now the uncles of the future King of England. This healthy baby boy would have a lavish baptism that took place on the 15th of October, so when he was just 3 days old. And both of his uncles would have parts to play in this fabulous ceremony. Thomas was one of a number who helped to hold the canopy over his nephew in the procession from the Queen's apartments to the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court Palace. But big brother Edward was given a role that was more individual and also more prominent, because he was tasked with carrying his nephew's half-sister Elizabeth, and with her, the richly garnished chrism cloth that would play such a vital role in the baptism ceremony itself. On the 18th of October 1537, 3 days after Prince Edward's baptism, Thomas was knighted. Arise, Sir Thomas. On the same day, however, his elder brother Edward was also further elevated because he was made Earl of Hertford. Now, as we have two Edwards on the scene, I think for clarity I'm going to refer to Edward Seymour as Hertford from this point onwards. So if I talk about an Edward, I am referring to Prince Edward. The Seymours' celebratory mood was also soon hit by tragedy, because on the 24th of October 1537, so just 6 days after Thomas and Hertford had been honoured in the way they were, their sister, Jane Seymour, died, most probably from a postpartum infection. Had Jane lived, it's often said that Henry would have essentially been hers to command. Had she then provided him with a spare to complement the heir she'd already given him, then, frankly, what could she not have asked him for? By extension, how much more secure would the influence of her family have been? So in this, Jane's death is not just a personal blow for the Seymours, it was also a political one. However, all was not lost, for it was still a Seymour boy that occupied the cradle of England, and there would still be financial rewards and political advancements up for grabs as a result of this. Certainly, Thomas received a number of grants of lands in March 1538, and a few months later, there were discussions about him marrying Henry Fitzroy's widow Mary. Mary was also the daughter of Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk. Fitzroy had died back in 1536. It said that it was Norfolk who was pushing for this match for his daughter, in the hopes of connecting his family to the Seymours. And I think we can take it as a sign of the continued prominence of the Seymour family that someone such as Norfolk would consider it a desirable match for his daughter, who had once been married to the king's natural and acknowledged son, a boy who was also Duke of Richmond, to go from that to wed a younger brother from this family. As it was, these discussions would ultimately come to nothing, although Norfolk would push the issue once more in 1546, and once again, the marriage did not happen then either. But the fact that Norfolk, that great opportunist when it came to any sniff of familial advancement, the fact that he was still interested in Thomas Seymour as a potential son-in-law in 1546, which was the year before King Henry's death, should show us that Thomas, and indeed his family, had managed to remain prominent enough to still be seen as valuable. Certainly, Thomas had been trusted to take part in a number of high-profile diplomatic missions throughout the last years of Henry's reign. Thomas had also played key roles in the public social life of the court by taking part in tournaments. He'd also served his king in a military capacity. On the 18th of April, 1544, Thomas's service to the crown was recognised when he was made Master of the Ordnance for life. And later that year, in October 1544, Thomas was made an Admiral of Henry's naval fleet. In addition to growing political and social prominence, Thomas also had a number of lands and various grants, and they conspired to make him a very wealthy man. It has been suggested that Hertford used his influence to get his brother Thomas into the House of Commons as a Knight of the Shire for Wiltshire, and this happened in 1545. And while this might be read as an act of brotherly love and benevolence, something that ultimately undermines my suggestion of an envious tension existing between them, I think we can also read it as an act of expediency because, frankly, anyone with eyes must have been able to see that Henry VIII was very ill, and that most probably Prince Edward would be ruling as a very young boy king. As such, that rule would need to be supported by some kind of regency, probably for the foreseeable future. If Hertford hoped to hold that kind of sway, and I think on the basis of the available evidence, it's clear that he did, then he was also clever enough to know that he was going to need allies. People who were willing and able to support him in maintaining that kind of power and control. However fraught and competitive the relationship might have been between these brothers, if I were in Hertford's position, this is how I would have behaved. Because I don't know about you, but I can certainly see the logic of trying to manoeuvre as many of my own family members as possible into positions of political power, places where they would be ideally suited to help me maintain that kind of control, right? And so it was, and just in the nick of time as it turned out, on the 23rd of January 1547, Thomas Seymour was finally sworn onto the Privy Council. King Henry VIII would die just 5 days later. On the 1st of February 1547, the executors of Henry's will, with the new king's approval, installed Hertford as both Lord Protector of the realm and Governor of the king's person. The king was 9, so it's going to be the best part of a decade before he would be deemed able to rule in his own right. So Thomas's elder brother had managed to place himself in the quite incredible position of being able to sway the government of the realm during the regency, while also being able to mould the mind of the king as he grew. As such, Edward had set down an enviable foundation for his own power during the hopefully very long reign to come. But little brother Thomas wasn't completely overlooked, though. On the 16th of February, he became Baron Seymour of Sudeley. That title came with a grant of lands that were valued at £500 per annum, and as such, they were able to add to his already extensive and impressive wealth. The following day, on the 17th of February 1547, Thomas was made Lord High Admiral. But on the same day, Hertford moved up in the peerage, because he became Duke of Somerset. I will now be calling Hertford Somerset in light of this move up in the world. The next big event came 3 days later. It was King Edward VI's coronation, which took place on the 20th of February 1547. And just over a month after that, on the 23rd of May, Thomas Seymour was installed as a Knight of the Garter. Perhaps Somerset thought he could dazzle, or at least pacify his little brother with lands and titles, all the while being able to keep him at arm's length from real power and influence. And if this is the way he was thinking, then Edward has sorely misjudged the true scale of his sibling's ambition, because Thomas was enraged that his brother should be both protector of the realm and governor of the king's person, and he felt highly aggrieved that one of these roles had not been given to him. In response, Thomas sulked. But while he sulked, he also schemed. Soon, Thomas found ways to sneak extra pocket money to his nephew the king, and while he was doing that, he was also encouraging King Edward's displeasure at the treatment he was receiving from his other uncle. Edward apparently began to complain that, quote, "My uncle of Somerset dealeth very hardly with me, and keepeth me so strait that I cannot have money at my will. But my Lord Admiral," that's Thomas, "both sends me money and gives me money." So, while Somerset was striving to shore up his own personal political power during these early years of his nephew's reign, the Regency years, if you will, Thomas was seeking to undermine his brother's future influence for the time in the reign when the Regency was over, and he was doing that with this cash-based charm offensive. However, there was also another person who was being left out in the political cold, someone who might have expected to enjoy a place of influence, and that person was Henry VIII's sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr. After all, Henry had trusted her enough to leave her as his regent when he went to fight in France in 1544, and so perhaps she might have expected a repeat performance, or at least something like it, during her stepson's minority. Interestingly, of course, Thomas Seymour had once paid court to Catherine, looking at her as a potential bride, and that happened in 1543, which was just before Henry VIII took his own interest in her, at which point any hope that might have veered in a marital direction for either one of them would have had to have been firmly paused. But now, in the aftermath of King Henry's death, and indeed as it turned out, with indecent speed, because it was around May or June of 1547, so just months after his death, Catherine and Thomas had married in secret. Now, history has often remembered this as a thrice-widowed woman finally marrying for love, giving way to her own desires rather than doggedly observing her personal duty, and that perhaps this was the very first time in her whole entire life that she even considered doing such a thing. All the while, Thomas is thus painted as an opportunist, someone who used his relative charm, youth, and good looks to beguile this most noble of ladies. And yeah, possibly that's what happened. That's the way this whole thing played out. But I can't help but think that this narrative actually does Catherine a bit of a disservice, because in essence it denies her capacity, her known capacity, to act politically. Because I happen to think that it's equally possible that having a physically attractive husband might have just been an added bonus, the icing on the cake, if you will, for a marriage that might actually have been intended to challenge the overweening control of Somerset. Look at it this way. Is it not plausible that this dowager queen, someone whom Edward, the king, thought of as a mother, if she found a way to pair up with that little king's favourite uncle, is it not plausible that this twosome might offer quite an attractive alternative to rule as regents for that king? Indeed, King Edward VI had been convinced to write a letter in support of the marriage, but unfortunately for Thomas and Catherine, in the scandalous aftermath of that wedding, it does seem that the boy king felt that he had been both duped and dishonoured by the pair of them. However, this didn't prevent Catherine from taking guardianship of her stepdaughter Elizabeth, of bringing that girl into the newlyweds' household. At the time of her father's death, Elizabeth was not yet 14 years old. Today, we would take a very dim view of the way that Thomas behaved with his new wife's charge. I mean, frankly, we'd almost certainly try to prosecute him for some of the stuff that he did. It is from Elizabeth's closest companion, Cat Astley, that we get information about the way that Thomas behaved with Elizabeth. Indeed, she would come to provide testimony of him sneaking into Elizabeth's bedchamber in the mornings, of him smacking Elizabeth's buttocks, apparently familiarly, of him trying to get into bed with Elizabeth to kiss her, and of the, frankly, still to me, baffling occasion when Catherine Parr, for reasons that I will, I'm sure, never understand, decided to hold Elizabeth tightly in the garden at Hanworth so that her husband Thomas could come at the girl with a blade and cut the gown she was wearing on her body into ribbons. And these are all, I think, disturbing, but perhaps the most chilling thing to consider is that we know about these acts, we have reports of them, because they are the ones that occurred with witnesses. So just what happened in the unwitnessed moments is going to have to be left to guesswork and to supposition. What we do know is that he was decades her senior. He was married to her mother figure, and even though we cannot access Elizabeth's innermost thoughts on this particular matter, I'm fairly safe, I think, in saying that this, at the very least, must have been very confusing for this girl. Certainly, some scholars have gone further, and they suggest that Seymour's treatment of Elizabeth is the thing that formed a large part of her decision to never marry. And we can certainly infer that there were moments between Elizabeth and Thomas that were intended to be shrouded in secrecy, that were not meant to be viewed by witnesses. Because Cat Astley would come to allege that Catherine Parr had found her husband alone with Elizabeth, and that when she did that, he was holding the girl in his arms. I think we can all understand that it's entirely possible that if Catherine had caught Thomas and Elizabeth in this embrace, she would have felt jealous, maybe even betrayed. But I also think she would have felt fearful, desperate to safeguard both Elizabeth's reputation and, in fact, her husband's life, because there were rumours at court about the nature of the relationship between Elizabeth and Thomas, and I can see Catherine trying to see those off. Certainly, in May 1548, Catherine did take action because she sent Elizabeth away. She sent her to live with Joan and Anthony Denny. And I think that May 1548 is a really telling time because by that point, the Dowager Queen was about 5 or 6 months pregnant. So she would have been looking towards entering her confinement to await the birth. And in her confinement, she wouldn't have been part of the household in quite the same way. It would, in many ways, have rendered her completely out of action when it came to seeing off any further scandals that her errant husband might involve himself in. So perhaps sending Elizabeth away at this time was Catherine's way of cleaning house. On the 30th of August 1548, Catherine gave birth to her first child, a daughter, who the couple named Mary. Sadly, it's thought that Catherine must have contracted an infection during this birth because just a few days later, in the early hours of the 5th of September, Catherine Parr passed away. We aren't completely sure what became of little Mary Seymour, the baby that was born at this time, but it is believed that she must have died very young, we think aged around 2 years old. As for the newly widowed Thomas, any shred of genuine grief that he may have felt for the loss of his wife does appear to have been lessened by the distraction of his own overreaching ambition, because the man was soon back to sniffing around a now 15-year-old Elizabeth to see if he could scope her out as a potential future bride. To assist in this aim, he then sets about trying to gather support all about him from other nobles. The allegation is that his plan was to marry Elizabeth, kidnap Edward VI and then to use that to usurp the place of his brother. There are reports, including one that comes to us from the imperial ambassador who was writing to his master Charles V at the time, that Thomas's final destruction was precipitated by a spectacularly rash and violent act. The story goes that on the 16th of January 1549, under cover of darkness, someone found themselves sneaking around the royal apartments at the Palace of Westminster. As this individual neared the king's rooms, Edward's little dog began to bark. The intruder then stabbed that dog to death and fled. It was soon suspected that this dog-killing intruder was none other than Thomas Seymour, that he had been panicked by the commotion of the dog barking as he attempted to reach his sleeping nephew with the intention of kidnapping him. Sure enough, Thomas was arrested the very next day, on the 17th of January 1549. He was questioned on the 25th of January, and then from there the net of interrogation spread out. So many other people were questioned as to their knowledge, even their participation in this alleged plot. Elizabeth and Cat Astley were included in these interrogations. Thomas was then questioned again on the 18th of February and again on the 23rd of February. 2 days later, on the 25th of February, a bill of attainder was put before Parliament. And just over a week after that, with the debates on the matter concluded, that bill was then passed on the 5th of March 1549. Thomas Seymour, first Baron Seymour of Sudeley, Lord High Admiral, and uncle to His Majesty King Edward VI, was now a condemned traitor. On the 20th of March 1549, Thomas Seymour was beheaded on Tower Hill. King Edward VI marked the event in his diary with the following phrase: "Also the Lord Sudeley, Admiral of England, was condemned to death and died the March ensuing." When it comes to Edward's half-sister Elizabeth, she has been credited with being much more poetic, albeit just as dismissive, when she heard news of Thomas Seymour's death, because it is said that she at that point proclaimed, quote, "This day died a man of much wit and very little judgment." But what do you think of the life, legacy and alleged crimes of Thomas Seymour? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video, or you can find me elsewhere on other social media platforms. I will leave links to the other places you can find me across the internet in my description box, so do follow me over on some or all of those so that we can continue this conversation and also start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with some of your friends. Please also let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up, and please subscribe to the channel. If you think you're subscribed, do just go have a little check. Make sure that YouTube hasn't been up to its old tricks, unsubscribing you against your will. While you're there, checking, subscribing and potentially resubscribing, why not also hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down so that YouTube will tell you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.